Thank you very much. As Catherine said, my name is Kirk Troberg. I am the Community Wildfire Resilience Coordinator covering Northwest Washington, which is a mouthful of the title, for the Department of Natural Resources. So I cover Whatcom, Skagit, Snohomish, Island, San Juan, Clallam, and Jefferson counties. So big chunk of geography, but I'm happy to be here. Just quickly, some background for me. As she mentioned, I've been fighting fire for 20 years, or this will be my 20th fire season coming up here. I started in the Colville National Forest working for the Forest Service, spent three seasons there before coming to Northwest Region DNR out of Cedar-Woolley, where I've done a whole slew of jobs over the last 15 years, including managing the wildfire program for Whatcom and Skagit County with firefighters and all that stuff. So I've been at this a while, and I'm happy to talk to you guys about it. What I have as a presentation, I've got a handful of slides about the Firewise USA program, which is what we're trying to get the community involved with. And it's why Catherine and Sue and Jody reached out to me. So I'll explain kind of what the program is, how it works, what the benefits are, what it is, and also what it is not. And then I have a whole bunch of slides where I'm going to talk about common mitigations, not necessarily specific to this community, but the common things that we see specific to every community. And the things that people can do to kind of reduce their risk and protect their structures. And then after that, I will introduce, so 2 weeks ago, I guess for some background, I came out, had a tour of the community, took some pictures, and then wrote a report that's called the Community Risk Assessment. And so once I'm done with the PowerPoint, I'll kind of show off that report, what it is, and talk about our next steps moving forward. And then I'll answer any questions. So without further ado, what is the Firewise USA program? So it's a recognition program administered by the National Fire Protection Association, which is, despite the name, it is actually a nonprofit organization aimed at educating and organizing communities to take action and reduce wildfire risk at the local level. And the reason we do that is because wildfires are a landscape scale problem, but they have local solutions. This is the level at which we can really affect how wildfires affect us, right? Over 1.5 million people live in Firewise sites across the United States. 42 states have Firewise sites. In Washington, there are around 160-ish sites in total, but about maybe not quite a third, somewhere between a quarter and a third of those sites are in Northwest Washington. Whatcom, Skagit, San Juan have probably the biggest bulk in the state. And we just got, so in Jefferson County, we've got at least 2 other Firewise sites that I'm aware of. I actually, the southern part of Jefferson County is split with my coworker out of Olympia. So if there's some down there, I may be misspeaking. But Port Ludlow has a Firewise site, and your neighbors up the street here at Bell Street have a Firewise site that we organized with them last year. So what is the program? It's heavily focused on protecting your structures and managing the space around them up to about 100 feet away from your home. We refer to that area as the home ignition zone. And in this graphic, you see the home ignition zone is kind of broken into, we'll say 3 zones, but there's really kind of 4. So the first one that they don't really include is the building itself, the structure itself, right? That's the most important thing. That's what we're trying to protect. Zone 1 is that red line around the house. It's 0 to 5 feet away from the structure. Zone 2 is the orange line, and that's 5 to 30 feet away from the structure. And then zone 3 is that larger green box, which is 30 to 100 feet away from the structure. The reason that the home ignition zone is set the way it is, at that 100 feet, is because there's good science to show, and Jack Cohen is the scientist. If you type in his name on Google, all sorts of good information will come up. But there's good science to show that when homes burn down in a wildfire, ignition is almost always, and when I say almost always, I mean like 80 to 90% of the time, caused by embers, right? Embers landing on the house and igniting it, as opposed to, a wall of fire that just marches across the landscape and slowly gets to your home. Embers are what cause homes to ignite. And that science also shows that the overwhelming majority of the time, those embers are sourced from within 100 feet of your home. So whether it's a tree, a bush, another building, whatever, usually the embers that ignite the home are sourced from within 100 feet of the home. Another reason that it's so important to do this at the community level is because how many people would 100 feet put you on your neighbor's property, or maybe even 2 properties over, right? That's the case for most of us. So that's all the more reason that this is really important as a community effort. So this is how the program works. The first step is to organize as a community. So you need to establish a FireWise board or committee and designate a leader. It needs to have 3 people. You need to designate one of those people to be the leader. And then we need to establish the boundaries of your site. At least 8 dwellings have to be included. There's a maximum of like 2,500, I think. So we've got a lot of leeway there. And the site has to be registered through the portal. Now, HOAs are a really convenient way to organize this because they have an existing structure, right? You guys already have the boundaries. That's easy because you have an HOA boundary. And then it's a lot of times there is an emergency committee or a safety committee or something like that we can dovetail that structure into. But it's entirely up to the community how you want to set up your board. You can have more than 3 people. You just need to have at least 3 people. That is the first part. The next part is the community planning process. So we've actually done the risk assessment, which again, as I mentioned, I was here 2 weeks ago, had a tour, looked around and wrote the assessment, which I'll present at the end of this. And then that risk assessment is good for 5 years. Every 5 years, it needs to be updated. The updates don't have to be huge, but it needs to just be basically, we need to make sure that it's current, right? That information hasn't expired. And that if there have been changes to risk, that those are captured at least a 5-year interval. Beyond that, based on the risks identified in the community risk assessment, the community needs to create a 3-year action plan, which is generally a pretty simple document. It can be 1 to 2 pages. And I've provided a template to the people I've been working with, but you need to identify as a community the actions that you would like to take. And those can be simple bullet points. Just year 1, we want to make sure everyone gets some education. Year 2, we want to do a chipping event. We want to buy screen mesh for everyone. There's lots of different things, and some of those will make a little more sense as we go on. But create an action plan that says, hey, these are the things that we want to accomplish on a yearly basis. The third step is putting your action plan into action, right? So completing the actions identified in your plan. The plan is, again, just a guiding document. If something comes up and the community says, you know what, I know our plan says we were going to do A, but B really kind of makes sense this year, do B. That's fine. The whole point of this structure is to give the community information and let you guys take that information and make the decisions you want about what makes sense to do, right? Because every community is a little different. Every community's values are a little different. And it ultimately it's your property. Then we need to document the community investment. So this, there's an online FireWise portal that your documents, your community risk assessment and your community action plan get uploaded to. It's managed by your board, your Firewise board. And every year, they need to document your investment through that portal. Now, investment works in two different ways. You need to invest this always gets a little sticky, so it sounds more confusing than it is, but bear with me. You have to invest the value of one volunteer hour, which is a figure the Department of Labor comes out with in 2024, which is now 2 years ago, I guess. It was $33.49 an hour. So one volunteer hour was equal to, $33.50 in value. So what they're saying. If you have 40 residences that wanted to participate, the community has to invest either in time or money, the value of one volunteer hour for each participating dwelling unit. So you got 40 residences that are going to participate. You're required to make an investment of 40 hours, or that the math there would work out to $1,339.60, or a combination of the two. It doesn't have to be all one or all the other. And the truth is, sometimes when people hear this, they're kind of like, that seems like a lot. I've never seen a community struggle to meet this. They usually blow it out of the water. A couple at a single residence spends 4 hours in an afternoon cleaning up their yard. They report it to their committee members so they can get it documented. That's 8 hours, 2 people, 4 hours each. That's 8 hours for the community right there, right? So it adds up very quickly. You do a community work day on a Saturday, you get 50 people there, you spend 2 hours, that's 100 hours right there, right? So each person hour counts. If the community rents a wood chipper, that money from renting that wood chipper counts towards your investment. And we do have a grant program that I'll talk about at the very end that I don't have a slide for. Excuse me. The money from that grant program is also eligible to count towards your investment. So the investment is not usually, it's never been a hurdle. It just maybe sounds like it. And then you report that investment and maintain good standing. The one thing that is not on here that is in the implement that I need to edit this slide and add a bullet for is the community needs to do one community education event every year about wildfire. Most of the time that gets dovetailed into like a community picnic in the summer or something like that, where you just spend 20 minutes educating the community about wildfire. Hey, this is what we're doing this year. These are kind of our concerns, whatever. But you need to do one community education event as well. And then once you report that stuff into the portal, you are in good standing. You become an official Firewise community. Just like the Bell Street folks up the road here. Why? Why would you go through and do this? Well, the main benefit is safety, right? Reducing wildfire risk is a benefit to everyone, both in terms of life and property. And time and energy spent on prevention saves time and energy spent on suppression, as well as anxiety and human costs and all that. I wish I could find the figure. I've been looking for it for years because I heard it somewhere and I believe it's true, but I'm having trouble finding it. But prevention dollars go much, much farther than suppression dollars, right? It's a lot cheaper to prevent a fire from occurring than to put a fire out.
Sure.
And that kind of passes the silly grin test, right? I mean, fighting fire is expensive, especially if fires get big, you get things like helicopters involved. Bills start to add up really quick. Another benefit is just community building, right? So neighbors working together on community projects, it helps strengthen your community ties. But it can also, if you have a wildfire, the fact that you've all worked together around the concept of preventing a wildfire will help during the response of that wildfire. It can be really important to have those bonds in a time of emergency. There are some ancillary financial benefits. So there are, in addition to our Firewise micro grant, which I'll talk about here in 1 second, there are some other grants out there too. if you are an existing Firewise community, that can give you priority for some of those grants. And then there are some states and insurance companies that do offer discounts to recognized Firewise communities. I have heard of one insurance company in Washington, and when I say I've heard of one, I don't even know the company. I just had one landowner tell me that their insurance company gave them a break because they were in a Firewise community. And then, I know it's pretty common in like California that insurance companies are very interested in your Firewise status. And there's a lot of moving and shifting going on in the insurance industry right now, in regards to this type of stuff. So the facts there may change over the years on how insurance companies view it, but they're very, very interested in it. Then another thing is publicity. So once you become an official community, NFPA sends out some metal signs that you can put up at the entrances to your community that says, "Hey, this is a Firewise community. This community takes fire seriously." It gives you a little publicity, and also it helps. Usually those signs get posted at the entrance to the communities, and when you have community members who maybe haven't participated or weren't aware or whatever, they drive past those signs every day on the way in and out of the community, and they start to think, "Oh, well, maybe I should get involved with this," right? So that's one of the benefits. I do real quick. I'll just jump in here and talk about our grant program, which I know the gals I've been working with are aware of already. But the Washington DNR does offer a Firewise micro grant, we call it, every year starting in February, and it's up to $4,000 for the community to do work related to fire preparedness. Whether that's the stuff that can be used for is pretty broad. It could be used to buy fire resistant plants for the community. It could be used to rent a wood chipper. It could be used to hire a contractor to do some tree removal for fire related stuff. It can be used to purchase and print educational materials to hand out to the community. It can be used to buy some gravel or some mesh screening, which I'll talk about later. It can be used for all sorts of stuff. It's a reimbursement grant. It's been one of our biggest successes, really, as a pass-through entity of getting money out to the populace to spend for this kind of stuff. And we really encourage people to participate in it. I know your community is already interested. I fully expect we'll get an application from you. And get you guys moving with the grant. So some things to remember. Partners are here to help throughout this entire process. So the DNR, we're kind of the spearhead of it, but we have other partners, Conservation District, Jillian is here. The Fire District, Robert Wittenberg from East Jefferson Fire and Rescue came, and he had an obligation. He had to leave midstream, but he was here for the first part of our walkthrough a couple weeks ago. They're very involved as well. Participation is voluntary, and everything that I'm going to give you today is a recommendation. They're just that. No one is required to do anything. A lot of times people are afraid we're going to come onto your property and say that tree needs to go, this bush needs to go, whatever. There's no mechanism for me to require you to do anything, even if I did want to, and I don't. I want to give you the information so you can all make the educated decisions to do what you want with that information, right? Firewising does not mean moonscaping your property. You don't need to live on the surface of the moon. I think I say that on a slide later here. But the picture there on the left, or excuse me, on the right, that's a Firewise site before and after, right? That's the exact same spot before and after it's had some fuel reduction for fire done. You can have vegetation. You don't need to live on the moon. Many mitigations allow to have lots and lots of plant life. And then the last one here, and sometimes I feel like this is the most important one for understanding, we're not trying to eliminate fire from the landscape with this program. Fire is natural, even in Western Washington. It has its place in the ecosystem, and it is going to occur at some point. It could be 50 years from now. It could be tomorrow. Probably not tomorrow, given the weather, but it's going to happen at some point. The goal is to keep it low intensity and manageable so fire department can get in and deal with it. And so your structures survive when it does occur and we limit the damage it does, not to eliminate it from the ecosystem altogether. Okay, that's the program. Now I'm going to jump into what mitigations we commonly recommend, and we walk through this kind of the same way we would walk through an individual home ignition zone assessment. So I'm going to start talking about the structure, and then we'll kind of start at the roof, work our way down the structure, and then out from there into that 100-foot ignition zone through those, zone 1, 2, or 3. So the first thing is the roof. Your roof is the largest surface on your house. Usually it's the most exposed surface on your house. It is by far the #1 cause of structure ignitions from wildfires. Again, you remember I talked about how that happens with embers, right? Your roof is the most receptive place to embers. So making sure you have a Class A fire rated roof. That could be asphalt shingle. That's Class A fire rated roof. It could be metal. It could be tile. There's lots of materials out there that meet that standard. What does not meet that standard is cedar shake. There are still some cedar shake roofs out there. If you have an opportunity to replace it, I would do it. I've been fighting fire, well, as I mentioned, for 20 years now, all over the Western United States. I was at the Carlton complex in 2014, where we lost something like 250 homes. If you have a cedar shake roof, there is nothing we can do for your house. And if I'm being totally honest, there's nothing we're going to do for your house because our time is just better spent elsewhere on houses that are defensible. A cedar shake house, we're talking about the roof. Cedar shake siding is still dangerous, but it's a lot less dangerous than a roof. A cedar shake roof is an undefensible house for a firefighter, and we just can't do much there. So we're probably going to move on to places that we can do stuff. The other thing is making sure your gutters are clean, especially in this part of the world, right? Gutters get filthy really quick this time of year, up March, April, May, as spring comes, and then obviously in the fall as needles and leaves are dropping. Make sure your gutters are clean. In the summer, if they look like that, all that stuff dries out, and that's just kindling, waiting for embers, right? And even if your gutters are metal, that can easily transition into the eave of your house and into your roof and off to the structure from there. So even if you do have a Class A roof, you need to make sure that roof is clean during times of fire danger, right? And I guess something I should have mentioned before too, when we think about this, even a place that people don't think of as high risk, right? Even if, if you look at a risk map of wildfire risk across the country or even across the state, most of Western Washington is not going to come up as high risk, right? Because it's not high risk relative to somewhere like Yakima. Sure. Okay, that makes sense. We can all handle that. But the reality is there are times when high risk conditions occur here, right? How many of you, I'm sure everyone's aware of the Bear Gulch fire that happened this year down the road here. That fire doubled in size in a single day in August. It went from like 7 to 15,000 acres. That was a high risk fire day in Western Washington, and that's what happened. So even if you're a place that is low risk 363 days a year, you can have 2 days of high risk conditions and you can lose your home during one of those 2 days. So don't think of risk as a constant, and don't think of low risk is not no risk, right? Okay, so moving off of the roof, siding and windows. So another pitch, this image is taken from a YouTube video from the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They have an awesome YouTube page that you can go to, and they've got a bunch of like 3 to 5 minute videos where they have a lab down in Georgia or something like that, where they have this giant warehouse and they build buildings in it out of all sorts of different materials. And then they have these ember generators where they just throw embers at the buildings and see how the different materials react to it. And you can see right here. So on the left is a shake-sided house that had, if you watch the video, they've got, plants and bark mulch out there in front and a wood patio. And then right next to it is a home with hardy board, cement board siding, gravel mulch, and you can see the difference just in that, right? So fiber cement, brick, stucco, even vinyl to some extent. Wood, not all wood siding is created equal. If you've got cedar shake siding, that's going to be more flammable than like T111 panels of siding, but they're still both wood and still both flammable, right? You're just that T111 panel type veneer is going to give you a little bit longer. Probably it's a little more resistant to ignition. And vinyl siding is flammable at high enough temperatures, but the more concerning thing is that it can melt and then expose the sheathing on your wall, which is almost certainly wood, and transition from there. Do anyone still have single pane windows in their house? No? Oh, I'm impressed. Especially in Western Washington, a lot of houses, especially if it's a house that was built 60s, 50s, 40s, whatever. A lot of times there'll still be a single pane window in there. And if your single pane window has bubbles in the glass, it means it's probably soda lime glass. And soda lime glass is not very thermal, doesn't have much thermal resistance. So if there's a fire outside, what can happen is that single pane will crack and can break. And then all of a sudden you can have a big hole in the side of your house where embers can get in, catch your carpet, your couch on fire, whatever you have in that room. Double pane windows are one more modern material. If they're glass, they're made out of borosilicate glass usually in this day and age, which is much higher thermal resistance. And also, the frame is generally steel. Some of the cheaper windows are vinyl, and there have actually been instances of that vinyl frame melting and the window falling out of the frame. I think that's a pretty extreme scenario where you have enough heat to melt your window frame that hasn't already caught your house on fire, right? But it could happen. Either way, dual pane tempered glass windows withstand heat much better than single pane windows. They won't crack. And if you have skylights, it's the same thing, right? Same thing with glass. And if any of you have those plastic dome skylights, those are something to consider. Another consideration with skylights too is that little shelf up behind the window at the top of the skylight there is a place that debris, needles, sticks, leaves love to collect. And so that's a place you want to make sure is clean when fire season rolls around. Vents. So vents they're designed to do exactly that, right? They're designed to be vents. The whole point is to allow airflow. And what flows in the air during fires are these embers, right? And those can flow right into your crawl space or your attic through your vents. And again, that Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety has a great video that shows that happening. They put a video or a camera in the attic and you can see it. There are some, some people have like positively pressurized attics that'll actually like force the air out. That can work in addition to screening, but generally speaking, you see 1/4-inch screen wire mesh as the construction standard because it's trying to keep critters out, keep birds out, keep squirrels out of your attic, whatever. That's great, but it doesn't do a great job of keeping embers out. So what we recommend is pass around a couple samples of this. I would like these back at the end if you don't mind. They're the only ones I have, but it's going down to at least 1/8 of an inch. So the ones I'm handing out The larger of the two is 1/8 of an inch. The smaller is a 1/16 of an inch, which is around window screen size. But they're from a company called Wildfire Defense Mesh. I'm not advocating for them over any other product. They just gave me some samples that are great to hand around to people. But you'll notice that it's also like a metal frame, right? It's not like a window screen, which can be a vinyl mesh. And the reason for that is because the vinyl mesh will melt, the metal frame ones won't. So you need to, it's not as simple as just putting a window screen over it. You need to have the proper materials. But it works really well. The airflow difference between 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch, I've been told by construction people, is negligible. It goes from like 72% airflow to 68% airflow. Not a huge reduction in terms of the ventilation of your crawl space or your attic, but it is a huge reduction in terms of ember intrusion. So 1/8 of an inch, really worth it. You don't even have to take the old mesh off. A lot of times you just put the new mesh right on top of it. You can do it from the outside if you want. Just something to consider. It's one of the best ways that you can protect your house. Crawl space vent, another thing I'll mention about that one is you see it's full of debris. All that debris is flammable. And if that debris burns, I mean, yes, the foundation is cement and non-flammable, but that cedar shake siding is real close to it. And that's an easy transition point, right? Just things to think about. Okay, decks and porches. So lots of people love to take every spare piece of lumber they've ever cut, store it under their deck till they need it someday. I also squirrel away my end cuts. However, I don't do it under the deck. It's not a great place for it. If you have flammable stuff underneath your deck, basically we have two recommendations. One, either remove it and have the underneath your deck be non-flammable. Rock mulch, whatever, dirt, however much space you have. Or if you have enough space, sheathe it in, close it in, right? So it's blocked off. So embers can't get in there and light that stuff on fire. If that ember generator we saw in the picture with the construction house was blowing on that pile of wood, that house would be a goner, right? That pile of wood is going to ignite. The deck is helping keep it dry, probably. It's ready to go, especially in times of high fire danger. It's going to be drier, and it's easy transition up to the deck. And from a deck that's attached to a house is an easy transition to the house for a fire. Debris that accumulates on your deck, particularly where it meets the sides of your house, needles, leaves, whatever, everywhere that the wind blows that stuff and deposits it is the same place that is going to blow and deposit embers, right? Those accumulation points are there because that's how the air flows around your house, and that's how the embers are going to flow too. So really important to have that stuff clean. Something that people don't often consider is deck furniture. If you've got wicker deck furniture or even metal deck furniture that's got cushions on it, those cushions could be flammable. And just as a consideration, you might be, maybe you're in Seattle for the day a fire happens. Maybe you're in town, maybe you're at work, maybe you're at an appointment. Whatever it is, you may not be home. So if you leave for the weekend, it's a good idea to take those cushions off your deck furniture and put them inside. Put that wicker furniture in your garage. What have you, just, trying to really limit your exposure. This farthest right photo is a photo of a good deck. What we like to see. You'll notice it's got rock mulch underneath it. I know it's kind of a small photo, but it's got rock mulch underneath it. The deck itself appears relatively clean. There's not a bunch of debris stored on it. There's nothing stored underneath it. There is grass right up to it, but that grass is pretty short and it's green. And it's not likely to, cause enough fire. If there was a fire in that grass, you'd be able to walk out, and stomp it out with your foot, right? It's unlikely to transition to your house. Another thing that common question that gets asked when we talk about decks is composite decking or like Trex decking. I think Trex is a main brand, but there's lots of composite decking out there. That stuff is flammable. It is less flammable than wood. I mean, it takes a lot more energy to get it going than it does wood. But it is combustible. It's pretty nasty when it does burn. Really acrid chemical smoke. It's a better alternative than just having like wood decking, right? But it doesn't mean it's fireproof by any means. And usually, even when you have composite decking, the frame of your deck is probably wood still. So not a cure-all, but it is a slightly better product. Okay, so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the house. So we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about zone 1 here. The recommendation for the first, should say 0 to 5 feet. The recommendation for that first 0 to 5 feet is totally non-burn. In the ideal world, that would be gravel or sidewalk or something that's just not combustible, right? So that way, nothing that burns can physically touch and impinge on your house. You want to, rake anything that's dead out of there. This right photo is a picture of a little cabin that was taken out in Glacier, Washington, up by Mount Baker. Not only do they have the cedar shake roof full of debris and a bunch of exposed wood, but you can see there's, other than the aluminum ladder down there, there's debris all the way up to the side of their house, right? This house would not be tenable to survive a wildfire. There is a big tree real close to it too, which I'll be honest is not a huge concern from a fire standpoint. And we'll get into this more as we start talking about getting away from the house a little bit, but firewising almost never involves removal of large, mature, healthy trees. They provide shade, they provide soil moisture, and also they're not. The danger is fire crawling up the tree and getting into the canopy, right? And the canopy torching off, and it can become a canopy fire, or it can throw embers a lot farther if it's a whole tree that torches. So the tree in that scenario really isn't the problem. It's what we call ladder fuels, and I'll get into that here in a minute. I have a slide on it. But fuels that allow, when I say fuels, I'm talking about plants. Sometimes I don't always give that context, but as a firefighter, to me, fuel is vegetation, right? So ladder fuels are fuels or vegetation that allows fire to climb off of the ground and up into the canopies of trees. And I will have some examples of that. I might be getting ahead of myself here, but okay, mulch. Mulch is good in general. Helps maintain soil moisture. Helps moderate soil temperature. It discourages weeds. It can prevent erosion and compaction. It can look pretty. It can even smell nice. However, it can be bad. So this particular picture, you can't see the mulch there. But you can see the skeleton that's left of those 2 arborvitaes on either side of the door. And what happened here is this person had red cedar mulch, and someone had flicked a cigarette as they were going into the house out into the mulch, and it smoldered around for a few minutes, and then finally got enough energy to climb up into those arborvitaes, and then it was off to the races from there. And you can see they didn't lose their house, but that's pretty serious damage. They're going to need a new roof. And it can really happen that quickly. So for mulch, we always recommend avoiding red cedar mulch within that first 5 feet of the home, right? We're still talking about that first 5 foot. Beyond that, mulch is a lot less of a concern. But use low phosphorus mulch, and then use rock mulch in that first 5 feet, and then organic mulch outside of that. Another thing we see commonly in people's yards is propane tanks. Propane tanks are kind of unsightly, which is why we've chosen these pictures, because these are some fun ways you can hide your propane tank that don't involve vegetation. People often like to screen their propane tanks with vegetation, right? Because again, it's a propane tank. You don't necessarily want it to be the viewpoint of your yard. But the way that these tanks work, if you have, they're full of liquid propane, right? And if you have a bunch of vegetation around your propane tank and it catches fire, it's going to start to heat up that propane tank. And when it heats up, the liquid inside wants to expand, pressure builds up inside your tank. And fortunately, someone had foresight on this when they designed propane tanks. So they're really unlikely to explode unless it's faulty. But what they will do is vent. Right under the cap with the valve is a safety vent that shoots and releases pressure straight up. And so if your propane tank gets too hot because the vegetation around it is burning, it's going to start venting. When it does that, it is a high probability that that fire that heated up your tank is going to ignite the gas that is venting out the top of the tank. I've seen this happen one time. It was pretty fascinating, quite impressive. It shoots a 30, 40-foot torch out the top of your propane tank. It can, anyways. If your propane tank is near your house, near your garage, underneath a tree, or has other vegetation around it, like you can see how that could be a problem, right? So the best recommendation we have for your propane tanks, hardscape around them the same way you would hardscape around a structure. Put them on gravel or on a cement pad, and then keep the vegetation around them to an absolute minimum. A little bit of grass is not the end of the world, but vegetation that is as tall as the tank itself is going to be a problem in a scenario where it catches fire, right? Again, if it's grass and you keep the grass mowed around it and weed trimmed, that's probably workable. You're going to have the heat and the energy to actually build pressure inside that tank to have this problem. But if you've got high vegetation, that's possible. Okay, so now we're talking about moving into that 5 to 30 foot range. As I mentioned earlier, you don't need to live on the moon. It can look like the photo in the right. We've got ideas for planting clusters, right? Put your, again, manicured green short grass is not a huge fire concern. We're talking in this zone, this 5 to 30 feet, we're really talking about interrupting the horizontal continuity of fuels, right? Does that make sense? So fire can't just continue to march across your yard and start igniting things everywhere it goes. And every time it ignites something, that throws up embers that get, blown towards your house. If you interrupt the vertical continuity of the fuel by planting in clusters, incorporating non-burnable features, and then keeping your lawn mowed pretty short, you don't give fire an opportunity to continue to generate embers to throw at your house, right? You can kind of interrupt some of that. And so that's really the goal. It's just some interruption of that horizontal continuity. It doesn't mean total removal. It doesn't mean you need to live in a Walmart parking lot. It's not any of that stuff. It's just interrupting that horizontal continuity of fuels. Now, as we get farther out, 30 to 100 feet, the horizontal continuity becomes a little less important, not important. You still want to break it up where you can, but a little less important. And what we start to get more concerned about is the vertical continuity of fuels. Now, I should mention, vertical continuity of fuels is important the entire time we're talking about your yard. So from 0 feet all the way out to 100. And this illustration is exactly what I'm talking about. Ladder fuels, continuous vegetation from the ground up to large trees that creates a path for it to climb up off the ground into the canopies of trees. Becomes much more dangerous, much more difficult to put out, and can launch embers a whole lot farther. So generally speaking, we like to eliminate tree limbs that are in that any lower than 7, 6, to 10 feet from the ground, anything head high. Think about like if you were on a riding lawnmower, could you ride underneath the tree? That's kind of a good test. Yeah. So, native plants native to this area are more fire resistant. Uh, they're plants that grew and evolved in our conditions. They're plants that are generally less flammable. Not all of them, but a lot of invasive species that I talk about here in a minute are more of a problem. So investing in native plants, and I'm sure your local conservation district probably has a plant sale.
We do.
Native plant sale.
Sell on Saturday.
Yep, great place to get some plants. So again, your native plants generally have higher moisture contents. There's not as much buildup of dead vegetation. That's not always true, right? These are generalizations. They're more resistant to drought. And some of them have a low compact growth form. This little scale here is just kind of a general scale of plant types. This isn't necessarily talking about native or invasive, but just general plant types that are more fire resistant or less fire resistant. So conifers like fire. It's part of their gig. Grasses, shrubs, things like that, light, flashy fuels, things that you know, if you imagine if I just took a lighter and went like this, it would go whoosh. That stuff's all gonna be super flammable, right? Plants that have a higher moisture content like succulents, some mosses, and almost said ivy, don't plant ivy. Ground covers, and other turfs are more suited to holding moisture and to limiting their fire risk. Okay, flammable plants. So these are some invasive, not all invasive. Blackberry and Scotch broom are invasive. Juniper and arborvitae are not necessarily invasive, but flammable plants, water stress plants are flammable. Anything that accumulates dead and dry material inside of it, and when I say this, I'm talking about arborvitaes. If you go and does anyone have an arborvitae at their house? Yeah, when you go home, stick your hands in it like this, and pull it apart a little bit, and you will see it is full of dead stuff. The Skagit Conservation District has a really cool video. They did an experiment where they lit some arborvitaes on fire, and they have a normal camera and a thermal imaging camera set up next to each other so you can watch it both ways. And the amount of heat inside that plant that you can't see once it starts going is pretty remarkable. And then anything that has a high oil and resin content. So Scotch broom is a huge one in this part of the world. Scotch broom is very oily, and Scotch broom looks like a building on fire when it's burning. It puts up a very black, thick, acrid smoke. It is bad news, and it is everywhere in this part of the world. Deal with it sooner rather than later because it's only going to continue to grow. And blackberries are the same way. Himalayan blackberry, we've got the little trailing blackberries that are native, not much of a problem. Himalayan blackberry, which is what we all think of as blackberry, has these big canes that fall onto each other every year and they die and the new ones grow up top and they all fall in and all that material falls down inside of them. They're well spaced because of the structure of blackberries. There's a lot of oxygen in there. Himalayan blackberry is very flammable. And not only is it very flammable, it is a very nasty plant to try and fight fire in. I'm sure you've all experienced dealing with blackberry. So beyond your landscaped area, but within 100 feet of your structures, if this is applicable, dispose of accumulations of plant material before you get into fire season. So if you're, have a spring cleaning pile, make sure you deal with that pile before fire season rolls around. Manage and reduce your invasive species, and then thinning unhealthy understory trees or removing dead trees near homes, recreation, roads. In your community in particular, ingress, egress routes, because you guys are pretty limited on ways to get in and out of the community. So protecting those is very important. And just like in this picture, there's this little, if I can, well, I don't know if you can see my cursor. This tree right here, It's little, it's dead, it's not providing anything there, it's a ladder fuel. That would be a tree that we would just say remove, cut it out, get rid of it. It's not doing anything. It's not, it's already dead. All it is a fire risk. If you want to leave it there, just put it on the ground, trim the branches off, lay everything so it touches the ground and it'll decompose a lot faster. And you're eliminating that vertical continuity. Okay, some other considerations. Quick, again, I mentioned we almost never recommend removal of large, mature, healthy trees. And that is because they provide canopy cover. It's good for shade, soil moisture, soil temperature, and just good for the habitat in general. And then, you know, if you do have paths and stuff in the community, making sure that those are maintained, not only so firefighters can use them, but also because they create fire breaks naturally. You know, those are just some considerations there. This QR code, if you want to, you can scan it. This will take you to that YouTube page for the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety that I mentioned. So I'll leave that up there for a second if you want to scan it. But you can also Google that and it'll come up. And they have lots and lots of videos about this stuff where you can see some of it kind of work in action. And that was my last slide.